This video is brought to you by World of Warships. Hello everyone, and welcome to another video on our own devices. I'm Jean Messier, and I'm here at the Royal Canadian Artillery Museum in Shilo, Manitoba, having a look at some items from their bomb room. Now, unfortunately, due to security reasons, I can't show you the interior of the bomb room, but I can pull some items out to show you. But before we get into this, a quick word from the sponsor of this video, World of Warships. World of Warships is a free-to-play online game that lets you take command of some of history's most iconic warships. Choose from over 600 battleships, cruisers, destroyers, aircraft carriers, and submarines, from the legendary Yamato, Tirpitz, Iowa, and Dreadnought, to the more obscure Rio de Janeiro, Viribus Unitis, and Mogador. Each ship is lovingly recreated down to the last detail, with key stats like top speed, turning radius, armor protection, and the time needed to aim and reload the guns accurately represented. Battle against a massive online community in more than 40 highly detailed maps with stunning water and weather effects that put you right in the heart of the action. With each victory, you unlock ever more powerful ships, allowing you to dominate the high seas. And with new content released every month, including in-game nations, ship classes, or themed maps like Transformers, Popeye, or Godzilla vs. Kong, there's always something exciting to look forward to. From November 16th to 30th, players can participate in a special in-game collaboration event between World of Warships and the popular anime High School Fleet. At registration, use the promo code HSF2023 to receive a huge starter pack including 200 doubloons, 1 million credits, 7 days of premium account time, and 2 High School Fleet commanders. Link in the description. Oh, and did I mention World of Warships is also available on console? Now, I don't normally play a lot of video games, but even I have to say World of Warships is a ton of fun, and I love the sheer variety of historical warships that you get to play. So, what are you waiting for? Like Nelson, I expect that every viewer will do their duty. Right, so the first item we have here is called a number 75 Hawkins mine or Hawkins grenade. So this was introduced into British Army and Home Guard service in 1942, and the reason this is called both a grenade or a mine is because it was intended for both roles. It was basically a multi-purpose demolition charge. So this consists of a flat 1-pint sheet metal container with a filler cap at one end, basically what you would put rubber cement or something like that inside. And it contained 1.5 pounds of Nobel ammonal explosive. Now, ammonal is typically composed of ammonium nitrate and aluminum powder, so basically tannerite, but there are different compositions. For example, ammonal T, which contains trinitrotoluene, or TNT. And this can be set off in several different ways, the main one being this pressure plate assembly at the top. So how you would arm this is you would fold back these little metal tabs at the back here and insert a pair of detonators into the fuse wells. It used 2 for redundancy to ensure that the mine would go off. And you would secure these in place by unrolling a rubber sleeve, which would also serve to waterproof the fuses. Strangely, this doesn't use a mechanical detonator like pretty much all British Ordnance at the time did. Instead, it used a chemical detonator known as the Special Igniter No. 1 Mark I. And this consisted of a glass ampule full of acid and a small charge of pyrotechnic composition that would react with the acid to produce a flash that would set off the detonator and the main charge. So once those were inserted, you would then fold these tabs back in to secure the igniters in place, and then this could either be placed on a road where an enemy vehicle would be passing or thrown in front of that vehicle. And this required 300 pounds of pressure to activate. And when the pressure plate was run over, this groove here would crush the glass ampules, releasing the acid, which would react with the flash composition to ignite the detonators and set off the mine. And this had enough explosive charge in it to blow the tracks off of any contemporary tank. Now, I don't actually know what the chemical composition in those igniters was, but I do have an educated guess, because the Germans used a similar igniter called a book igniter in their Glass Mine 43 minimum metal anti-personnel mine, and that reacted concentrated sulfuric acid with a mixture of powdered naphthalene and flash composition, which is typically a perchlorate salt mixed with magnesium powder. I'll bet you anything that the British igniter used the same composition, though if any of you have any period sources stating exactly what the composition was, please let me know. So there are several different versions of the Hawkins mines produced. There was the 75A, which contained a military grade of ammonal, which was 80% as powerful as the commercial variant, and this was for logistical reasons. There was also the Mark II Hawkins mine, which had a flat pressure plate without this ridge and angled fuse pockets, and also had an improved type of chemical igniter that was manufactured in one piece and came in a Bakelite case sealed with wax, so it was a lot more water resistant than the original configuration. And finally, the Mark III Hawkins mine eliminated the filler cap. The Americans also produced their own version of the Hawkins mine called the Light Antitank Mine M7, and you'll often see these in photographs of American paratroopers preparing for D-Day. Now, in addition to the pressure plate assembly, this could also be fitted with a short piece of safety fuse, allowing it to be used as a makeshift grenade or a delayed action demolition charge. Now, early in the Desert Campaign in Egypt and Libya, the British Army established a production line for Hawkins mines in Egypt. And the reason that they chose the Hawkins mine was because Egyptian industry couldn't produce good quality springs, which are necessary for mechanical mine detonators. And so a chemical detonator was ideal for this production environment. However, instead of ammonol, these versions, which are known as EP1, Egyptian Pattern 1, were filled with dynamite, which, as we've covered before on this channel, tends to sweat or otherwise degrade when it's improperly stored. So these mines tend to be far more dangerous and volatile than their regular counterparts. And while these were originally intended for use by the Home Guard, of course, the British Isles were never invaded, except for the Channel Islands. I know that you're typing in the comments right now. Don't worry, I know. So these were mainly used by Army engineers, as well as other troops that had to do demolition work. Anyways, let's move on. So the next item I have here is a Limpet mine Mark IV, and Limpet mines are designed to be attached to the hulls of enemy ships, either by combat swimmers or canoeists using magnets, and they're named after the limpet, a marine mollusk well known for clinging very tenaciously to rocks. Now, the development of the Limpet mine in British service is a very British story, a very boffins in the backyard shed, make do and mend sort of affair. So the Limpet mine was the brainchild of Stuart McRae and Cecil Clarke, who worked for the Research Division of British Military Intelligence, and they conducted their initial development work between 1939 and 1940. And after coming up with their initial design, they decided to build a prototype out of a very eccentric array of materials, including tin plates and bowls purchased from Woolworths, which they attached together and fitted with commercial horseshoe magnets, and then filled with, and I'm not kidding here, porridge in order to simulate the buoyancy and the weight of actual explosives. And they did their testing for this initial prototype at the swimming pool of the Bedford Public School. And so they made a keeper plate, which is what a combat swimmer would use to carry around the mine, out of a griddle plate strapped to their chest, and they would dive into the pool and practice pulling the mine off the carrier plate and placing it on a piece of simulated ship hull. And in this way, they were able to tweak, for example, the buoyancy of the case and the strength of the magnet so that it was as convenient as possible for a combat swimmer to use. Now, their final test of this configuration was to place the Limpet mine on the hull of a boat on the River Ouse, and they made it go up to 15 knots and found that the mine stuck in place. Now, all that is well and good, but unless you have some sort of time delay fuse, your Limpet mine is going to be useless, or at the very least, a suicide weapon. However, you can't exactly use a piece of burning safety fuse underwater, and mechanical time fuses tend to be susceptible to water infiltration and other modes of failure. So what McRae and Clarke came up with was a fuse consisting of a spring-loaded firing pin that would impact a percussion cap, but where the firing pin was held back by a piece of soluble material. And as the mine sat in the water, that material would dissolve away until it finally released the firing pin and set off the mine. And what material did they find for this? Well, of all things, aniseed candy balls. So they presented their design, which was accepted and became the Limpet Mine Mark I, which contained 3.5 pounds of TNT tetryl explosive mix. And this was enough to penetrate 60 millimeters of hull plate when used underwater. This is followed by a number of other versions. The Mark II had 2 fuse wells rather than 1 for added redundancy, and the Mark III and the Mark IV, like this one, had a more flattened profile compared to the original models. There's also the rigid Limpet No. 6, which was designed to be placed by a canoeist using an extendable placement rod, and this had a rectangular body filled with 2.5 pounds of plastic explosives, as well as a metal frame with 6 magnets. And these magnets were articulated so that they could conform to the curve of a ship's hull. And finally, there was a very small limpet mine called the Mk.IV, and this had a bakelite body which contained 8 ounces of TNT, a well for a pencil detonator, and a set of magnets. And this was intended for use on land by SOE or commando groups for, say, blowing up railroad tracks or other acts of sabotage. Now, of course, the aniseed candy ball fuse that Clark and McCrae came up with was a good proof of concept, but it wasn't ideal for combat. So instead, a number of different delay mechanisms were invented, including the number 10 delay pencil. And this consisted of a detonator, which was activated by a percussion cap fired by a spring-loaded firing pin, but the firing pin was held back by a metal wire. And behind this was a copper sleeve containing a glass ampule of cupric chloride. And so to use this, you would use a pair of pliers to crush the copper sleeve. This would break the ampule, releasing the cupric chloride, which would then eat away at the wire. And after a certain delay, the wire would eat through it, would release the firing pin, and set off the charge. Now, if you've seen the movie Valkyrie with Tom Cruise, you've seen one of these delay pencils in action. And in the movie, as in real life, it shows that the main conspirator in the July plot, Klaus von Stauffenberg, had to specially modify his pliers to account for the fact that he was missing fingers on his remaining hand. Now, although the number 10 pencil was widely used, not only in naval applications, but also for sabotage by Special Operations Executive, SOE, it wasn't very reliable. The rate at which the wire could be eaten through varied widely depending on a number of factors, including the ambient temperature. So a better delay pencil was invented called the L number 9. And instead of holding back the firing pin using a piece of metal wire, it instead used a block of lead alloy that had a very specific groove cut in it. And normally this was held in place by a safety pin. To use the pencil, you pulled out the safety pin, and the tension of the spring started to pull at that piece of lead alloy, which started to stretch or creep at a precise rate. And eventually it would stretch and then finally fail and release the firing pin. And the rate at which that material deformed was far more known and far more reliable than chemical eating away at a metal wire. And so these were preferred. And that's the type of pencil that would be used in this mine, inserted into this well at the end. Now, the rigid limpet number 6 used a similar system to the number 10 delay pencil, only instead of cupric chloride and metal wire, it used acetone dissolving a celluloid washer, and this was known as an AC fuse, acetone celluloid. Now, in order to modify the delay, you were provided with a number of different ampules with different concentrations of acetone. So these were color-coded from red, which had the highest concentration and gave you a delay of 3.5 hours, all the way to violet, which had the lowest concentration and gave you a delay of 8.5 days. So limpet mines were famously used in 2 major World War II operations, the first of which was Operation Frankton, which took place between the 7th and 12th of December 1942 and was carried out by 13 Royal Marine Commandos equipped with Mark II cockle canoes. And their mission was to infiltrate and lay limpet mines on the hulls of ships in Bordeaux Harbor. And while they were successful and ended up severely damaging 6 ships, unfortunately this came at a high cost, as 8 of the 13 men were killed in action. Now, the other major operation using limpet mines was Operation Jaywick, and this was carried out on the night of September 26, 1943 by the Allied Z Special Unit, which consisted of 6 British and 11 Australian soldiers. Their mission was to infiltrate and sink Japanese shipping in the port of Singapore, and they were even more successful, sinking or damaging 7 ships or 30,000 tons for the loss of 0 personnel during the operation. And limpet mines are still part of the arsenals of many of the world's navies to this day. Anyway, moving on. All right, so the next item I have here is one that I've discussed before in my video on rifle grenades. This is a number 68 anti-tank rifle grenade, and this has the distinction of being one of the first pieces of ordnance to use a shaped charge warhead to be issued to any army anywhere. Now, this was designed to be fired out of the standard discharger cup for a short magazine Lee Enfield number 1 Mark III, and how this would work is you would put this into the discharger cup. There's a gas check plate at the rear. You would pull out a safety pin and then load a special grenade launching blank and fire this at an enemy tank. And then when it landed, a spring-loaded firing pin in the tail unit here would be thrown forward and strike a percussion cap, setting off the shaped charge warhead. And this contained 5.5 ounces of various types of explosives, including lyddite, pentolite, RDX and beeswax, plastic explosive, or TNT. And this had a range of around 50 to 75 yards and could penetrate 50 millimeters of armor if it struck head-on at 90 degrees, or more realistically, 40 millimeters of armor when it struck at 30 degrees. Now, these were originally developed for use by the regular British Army, but they rejected it because its performance was pretty much on par with the 55 caliber Boyce anti-tank rifle that they were already using, although its accuracy and range were inferior. So instead, this was handed off to the Home Guard, who kept it in inventory for the rest of the war. So there were a number of different variations of the number 68, and these mostly had to do with the explosive filling, with the design of the warhead, or with the materials used for various parts in the tail unit. And these were the Mark I, which had fins on the main body, a Bakelite gas check screw, and a domed liner in the shaped charge warhead. The Mark II had no fins on the body, a body made of Mazak, which is a low-temperature melting alloy, and a brass screw on the check plate. The Mark III had a larger initiator pellet and a conical liner in the warhead. The Mark IV had a Mazak gas check plate. The Mark V had a steel gas check plate. The Mark VI was the US manufactured Mark V, and the R variant was a Mark IV tail on a Mark III body. And this particular one is a Mark IV, as you can see stamped on the fins. Anyways, moving on. All right, so the next item I have here is a number 69 grenade. Nice. And this was introduced in 1940, but not widely issued until 1942. Now, at the beginning of the Second World War, the standard British infantry hand grenade was, of course, the number 36, or Mills bomb. But the problem with the Mills and other grenades like it was that its lethal blast and fragmentation radius was larger than the average distance that a soldier could throw it, and so it had to be used from behind cover. And such grenades are known as defensive grenades. And the British realized that they needed an offensive grenade, a grenade that mostly worked via blast, and thus had a lethal radius smaller than the radius that it could be thrown. And that led to the development of the number 69 grenade, which has a Bakelite body to limit fragmentation. These were manufactured by the company Thomas de la Rue in London and contained 13 ounces of various types of explosives. So it could be filled with amytal, and those grenades are designated by a green band around the body, lyddite, which is designated by the letters LYD, or baritol, which is designated by the letters BAR. You'll also see examples with red X's painted on the body. Those are waterproofed variants for use in tropical climates. You'll also see them with very reddish Bakelite. Those are produced in Australia. But perhaps the most distinctive feature of this grenade is the fuse. So unlike most grenades of the era, this didn't have a time delay fuse. Rather, this is equipped with what's known as an always fuse, which detonates on impact. And more than that, this was designed to detonate no matter what orientation the grenade hit the ground. And so how this works is that on the inside, you have a little lead alloy ball that sits in between two conical surfaces, one of which is attached to a spring-loaded firing pin. And so to use this, you would unthread the plastic cap at the top to reveal this ribbon. Now, normally there would be a curved lead weight at the end of the ribbon. That's missing on this one. And once the cap is removed, you would then just throw the grenade and the ribbon would unwind in flight. And the inertia of the lead weight would pull on the ribbon and pull out the safety pin. And as soon as it hit the ground, the inertia would cause that lead ball to push against those conical surfaces, pushing the firing pin into the percussion cap and setting off the explosive charge. Now, the always fuse was also used on a number of other British grenades, including the anti-personnel grenade number 70 Mark I, II, and III, the anti-tank hand grenade number 73 Mark I or II, also known as the thermos grenade and produced for the Home Guard, the white phosphorus grenade number 77 Mark I and Mark II, and the number 82 gammon grenade, an always fuse connected to a little stockinette bag. And the idea was that it was a customizable grenade that could be issued to paratroopers, commandos, and other personnel who would be issued large quantities of plastic explosive. So depending on the job that had to be done, you could fill it with more or less explosive. So just a little bit of explosive, for example, if you just wanted an anti-personnel grenade, or more explosive if you wanted to blow the tracks off a tank or something. Now, unfortunately, the number 69 grenade didn't prove very successful, and it was mostly relegated to the training role, since it was a lot safer to use with raw recruits than a regular number 36 grenade. And it had another problem, which was that the little lead ball in the always fuse tended to become a lethal projectile, which sort of negated the usefulness of this as an offensive grenade. And so these were very quickly declared obsolete in 1947, and most of them scrapped. All right, let's move on to our final item. Right, so going all the way back to the beginning of the British grenade designation system, this is the first grenade officially adopted by the modern British Army and is known, appropriately enough, as the grenade number 1. Now, we tend to take grenades today as an infantry weapon for granted, but this wasn't always the case. Indeed, in 1902, the British military declared that grenades as a weapon were obsolete and that they had no use for them. However, just 3 years later, in 1905, the Japanese made great use of grenades in the Russo-Japanese War, and reports of this reached British officials who then decided that, yeah, we'd better have a grenade of our own. And so they contracted the Royal Ordnance factories, who in 1906 produced and officially adopted the aptly named grenade number 1. This was a very simple stick grenade. You have your explosive charge, in this case, picric acid and lyddite, in a brass tube, a steel fragmentation ring, a cane handle, a belt clip, and an impact fuse rather than a time fuse. So you would remove this safety cap and then throw the grenade, and once it impacted the ground, it would detonate. And to make sure that this hit the ground square on, you have these ribbons trailing out behind the grenade to stabilize it in flight. Now, unfortunately, the number 1 grenade used a detonator that could only be produced by the Royal Ordnance factories, and production was very slow, so slow, in fact, that by the time war broke out in 1914, only 420 of these had been produced. That's not 420,000, 420 for the entire British Army. And so it was realized that a commercial grenade was needed, and needed fast, in order to fill this gap. And so the British turned to one Frederick Martin Hale, an entrepreneur who had formed the Cotton Powder Company in Faversham, Kent, and produced a number of highly successful hand and rifle grenades, which were sold to all sorts of countries, including Spain, Germany, and Mexico. And even as far back as 1906, when production of the number 1 grenade began, the British knew that they were going to need more grenades to supplement their stocks, and so they officially adopted the Hale's pattern grenade as the grenade number 2 Mark I. They later tried to convert that into a rifle grenade, in this case, a rodded grenade with a long rod that fits into the rifle's barrel, to produce the grenade number 2 Mark II. Though later they just switched to buying the Mexican pattern rifle grenade that Hale was already producing. And so both number 1 grenades and Hale's grenades were used side by side in the first years of the First World War. But unfortunately, the number 1 grenade didn't perform all that well. The impact fuse was found to be very insensitive and unreliable. It would really only explode if it hit the ground head on. And the Germans soon found that they could easily deflect these using wooden boards, or that often they wouldn't explode at all, and they could be thrown back. Even worse, the original number 1 grenade was issued with a 40-centimeter long cane handle. But what happened to a lot of soldiers was that when they wound up the grenade to throw it, it would often hit the back of the trench and explode. So they tried to solve this problem by issuing the grenades with a shorter 18-centimeter cane handle, like this one, which became known as the grenade number 3. But by the time this change was implemented, the far superior Mills bomb had already reached the front, and these grenades were quickly retired. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you had as much fun as I did looking at these absolutely fascinating items. And thank you so much to the Royal Canadian Artillery Museum for allowing me to film their wonderful collection, and to World of Warships for sponsoring this video. Anyways, I'll see you next time on another video where we'll look at yet more fascinating ordnance and other devices just like these. Until then, I'm Jean Messier from Our Own Devices. Have a great day.